Friends, today is a special day of firsts. Number one, we drive the all-new 2016 Chevy Camaro. And number two, we head east on a road trip to explore a bit of what America has to offer. So, if you're going to see the good old US of A in a Chevrolet, one with some muscle at that, where else would you start but Motown? So two things before we leave the D. Number one, as we were setting up for the shot, a guy rolls by with a Chrysler minivan and snaps a shot. And number two, we need to make an important stop here. And I'll admit it has nothing to do with Camaros, but it has a lot to do with Chevrolet history, Corvette in particular. The house behind me you see here is in Grosse Pointe Woods, Michigan, which is a couple of towns over from the D. And this house was the house of the first ever Corvette engineer, Zora Arkus Duntoff. And up until I want to say 2 or 3 months ago, that house was for sale. So I had this grand plan of rolling over here with this 2016 Camaro and saying, hey, how about we do a trade? But I found out today, sadly, it has already been sold. So now we must press on to our next destination. So as we start a little road trip here, we need to get something out of the way right from the top. Normally when you and I drive performance cars, it's always on what? Country roads, canyon roads, or racetracks. But here, we're going to be driving nothing but arrow straight interstates and some two-lane roads, but they're going to be arrow straight for 500 miles. But you and I still have to talk about pulling power. So here's a great example. There's a truck here, we want to pass him. We're in 5th gear. Let's try this without downshifting. Just put our foot into it. What's the old saying? There's no replacement for displacement. Literally in any 4-cylinder turbo or a V6, you would have needed to downshift. And the funny thing is, it's funny for us to be even talking about pulling power in this SS, because if I were to go and pull any of the people that owned these cars previously, I don't think anyone would complain about the pulling power. And let's say we want to catch up to these guys here. Let's try downshifting to 4, and it's instantaneous. As a matter of fact, forget about the pulling power, just listen to the sound. That is wonderful. You could entertain yourself on any long trips just by playing around with downshifting. Then again, you'd have to pay for the fuel economy. So what's a road trip without an unplanned side excursion or two? We're driving down the interstate, making our way to Ohio, and we see Luna Pier. Figure it's the last exit before we get to Ohio. And you know what, maybe we should take some pictures right by Lake Erie. Well, we didn't bank on the fact that there are levees, much like in New Orleans, because the actual land here is somewhat lower than Lake Erie. So we didn't want to gyp you guys out, so we found a pier. We might as well show you one anyway. And this one, hopefully it doesn't break and I don't go for an unplanned swim, because this is enough excursion for me. It's very pretty, isn't it? I like it. Say goodbye to Michigan. Now, one more note about pulling power. And I don't know if this is a function of the transmission itself or the fact that there are so few American V8s on offer with manual transmissions, but the feel of this transmission, it's not so much a short throw, but it's a very solid throw. It's not a heavy transmission, but there's a weight to it, there's a balance to it you don't get in other manual transmissions, and I think that's unique to V8 American transmissions. Yeah, you would get this if you've ever driven the G8 GXP, the SS V8, it's the same kind of feel to it, but the confidence that this inspires, I think, works in concert with the extra power, the 455 horsepower that's in this engine. I think that's the main difference in feel from Gen 5 to Gen 6 in pulling power. Way back in the day when I was a wee bit car guy, I was really into roller coasters. Being honest, I still am, which is why we couldn't come through this region of the world without stopping here, Cedar Point. Now, I have never been here before, and of course, the one day we're here, it is closed, so you and I are going to talk about its history, which is rather unique. It was started back in the 1800s by a German immigrant who turned this peninsula that shoots out into Lake Erie into a picnic area, a Biergarten, and a dance hall. Of course, if you're going to have the beer, you're definitely going to have the dancing. But it wasn't until 1870 when a railroad company bought the whole area and started to make it a proper amusement park. Sometime between 1870 and 1900, the first roller coaster went up. I couldn't find the exact date. But then in 1902, the second roller coaster went up. And now it's turned into the second oldest amusement park in the country. It's got 72 rides, 17 of which are roller coasters, 4 of which are over 200 feet. Now, being that we cannot ride this ride, we're gonna have to go back to our own ride. Okay, I know we said the place is closed, but I ran into someone I know, so what better time to straight chill with an old friend? So I hear you got a movie coming out. The gauges, can I just say, huge difference. Like in the old car, you had these 2 huge binnacles here that were almost independent of each other. This is a combination of clear, legible gauges, which clearly come from the Corvette. But in the center, you got the screen, and what they've done is it's basically a smart screen. So you can use this 5-way controller to get trip computer information, performance gauges, audio, phone, navigation, and settings. But you and I want to focus on performance gauges, and here you get an analog array of 4 up top. So you get the oil temperature, you get the water temperature, you get obviously the fuel gauge and the voltmeter, but then there's a G meter. There's oil temperature, which is a little bit more on a bar graph, oil pressure on a bar graph, transmission fluid temperature on a bar graph, and then G's on a bar graph. So this is an interesting little setup here, and I'm sure you're probably going to get a turbo boost gauge in the turbo car, if I'm really reading the tea leaves correctly there. And I think this goes a long way in adding some maturity to the interior of the Camaro. Riddle me this: what is more American than rock and roll? The Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. Now, riddle me this: why the hell is this building in Cleveland? I have always wondered this since like the beginning of time. Did a little research, and it turns out this was a foundation before it was a building. It was founded by a bunch of Atlantic Records executives, and they actually had inductees before this building even existed. The first group included like Elvis, Ray Charles, and if you have ever seen his Paris concert with It's a Man's World, James Brown, it was incredible. But I digress. Well, the story goes like this. They had the foundation in '86, but the museum wasn't open until like 1996, but there was a competition of where they were going to put that museum. It was Detroit, Motown, Cincinnati, here obviously Cleveland, and then there was of course New York and Memphis. Now, I don't understand why it didn't go to New York, but I did a little research on that and found out in the competition, Cleveland made the case that this was the birthplace of rock and roll, and that there was a DJ that coined the term rock and roll, and then the DJ kind of promoted rock and roll albums, and actually David Bowie's first US tour started in Cleveland. Who knew? Anyway, what happened was, what's that old saying? Something walks and money talks. Cleveland put up $65 million to put this thing here, and then Continental Airlines actually sponsored it as well to put this thing here too. So now we have it here in Cleveland. But what's funny is when they have the inductee Hall of Fame ceremonies, it usually happens in New York or Los Angeles, but they finally agreed they're going to do them now once every 3 years here in Cleveland. And speaking of inductees, the 2016 class, it includes Janet Jackson, I Feel For You, Shaka Khan, and straight out of Compton, NWA. Okay, so we've got a Kia and a Nissan Pathfinder we're trying to pass here. This gives us an opportunity to play around with one more thing. If you notice, we've got a manual transmission here, but there's paddle shifters here. If you remember back when we drove the Corvette, in the manual transmission versions, they're fitted with a Rev Match, and to switch that on and off, you use the same paddle shifters, and they're like metal. You use these same paddle shifters from the automatic. So like, for example, let's switch it on, and if I downshift, so we're in 6, let's downshift to 5 to pass some of these guys, and it did the active Rev Match. Let's downshift again, and it did the active Rev Match. See that? And then we're continuing. We don't want to go too fast here because we don't want to get a speeding ticket in a bright yellow Camaro. Okay, so we are at the end of our first day of our trip from Detroit to New York, and really, what's a road trip without food? So I wanted to go to one of my guilty pleasures. Actually, I shouldn't even call it a guilty pleasure. I love me the Cracker Barrel. And why? Because for us people from New York that live in California, this is like exotic eating here. Like, you get, look at this, chicken fried steak with homemade green beans, mac and cheese, and a salad, biscuits, all this stuff. This is $9. Like, you can't buy In-N-Out Burger for $9, barely $9. And they have rocking chairs outside where after dinner you can just kind of like straight chill outside. It's 65 degrees out in Ohio. This place is awesome. Now, it has been a very interesting day. In one day, we've gone from Michigan to Ohio. We've been stopped by the local constable in Lake, what is it, Luna Pier? Yeah, it was Luna Pier, Michigan, because one of the nosy neighbors didn't like our car in her neighborhood, but it turns out the local constable did, and he spent more time talking to us about the car than even talking to us about my license or the registration of the car. Then we pressed on from there, and we had a bit of an interesting, I don't want to say interesting, but a bit of a scare, because this mount that gets, basically we use this thing to mount the cameras to the car so we get those mount shots that you guys see. We're driving down Interstate, what was it, 80 or 90? I think it was 90, yeah. We're driving down Interstate 90 at about 80 miles an hour. This whole thing fell off the car. We had no idea where it went. We ended up chasing it using the Wi-Fi, because this thing is controlled by your phone with Wi-Fi. We ended up chasing it using Wi-Fi. We couldn't connect via Wi-Fi. We turn around after going back 10 miles, and about 5 miles in, we're driving down the road, and there it was. Let's just say it was a good day, and I didn't even have to use my AK. So until tomorrow, I'm going to say Bish Bader, and I'm going to get right into my dinner at the Cracker Barrel. Who knows? I may even hit the old rocking chair later. Okay, one more thing before we turn in for the night. We need to feed our horse here. So far, this car is a total, we're not talking about a trip, but total miles on this one car is 675, literally brand new. We've put on almost half of that here today. So we've done about, the computer's telling us about 18.5 mpg as an average. So let's, oh look, there's actually no gas cap. It's got the capless fuel filler. That's pretty cool. It's a nice little touch. Okay, so enough about gas caps. Let's see how much this thing is actually gonna take. I'm guessing it's gonna take about 50 bucks in gas, but then again, I could be completely wrong because I'm used to gas at what, $3.50 a gallon in the California Republic. Here, we didn't even comparison shop gas, and it's $2.30 a gallon. $2.30, which makes a V8 SS all the more palatable in this area of the world. And can I just say, you bastards that run the 3 refineries in California, screw you and the horse you rode in on, raising the gas prices because, oh, the one time a year that we need the magical blend that California says we need, that's when magically a refinery actually goes offline. Happens every year. You don't think we notice? Anyway, enough of me getting pissed off about gas prices in California that are artificially high because of 3 companies that control the refinery process in the state. Thankfully, you don't have this in the other 49 states. Actually, I don't know about Alaska, or Hawaii for that matter. You know what? We're not even gonna make it to 50. My estimate was completely off. The thing stopped automatically at less than $35 for 15 gallons. You know what? Even though it says don't top it off, I'm topping it off. That's how I live life dangerously. Friends, good morning and welcome to day 2 of our Camaro road trip. And if you have not sussed by now, we are at Niagara Falls, New York. And as the proper New Yorker that I am, I have never been here before. So, some fun facts. Number 1, Niagara Falls sits on the border of the US and Canada, where the Camaro used to be built. Number 2, Niagara Falls is not 1 falls, it's 3 falls. You can see the one in the distance there, that's called Horseshoe Falls. That sits entirely on the Canadian side. This one here is American Falls. Take a wild guess why they call it that. This is Goat Island. On the other side of Goat Island is Bridal Veil Falls. Now, there is some dispute on who founded it. The general school of thought is Samuel Champlain, the French explorer who explored into Canada and this region of the world. It was his group that explored this area. Now, there's also some dispute as to the name, where it comes from. One school of thought is it's named after the indigenous Iroquois people. Another school of thought is it's named after a town nearby. And another school of thought is it's named after the term neck. Get it? Now, some geology. So you see the water there, it's actually green in color. That is erosion happening right before your very eyes. So as the water is going over the rocks, it's eroding little bits of the rock that picks up the particles of the rock that they call rock salt, and that gets into the water and turns it green. Now, it's not just the erosion that's happening here, that supposedly this will not be here in 50,000 years, but there's also some dispute as to where the actual border is, because unlike on dry land, the border moves literally every day. So think about it. As the rocks move and the erosion moves, the border moves, and there's a lot of politics that go into this, because this is not just tourism, and sadly there are a lot of casinos around here. This is power generation. Now, before we press on, I feel it important to point out that in this part of the Empire State, I am considered a downstater. And as a proud downstater, I want to point out that the first, or one of the first bridges that connected this side of the falls with that side of the falls was designed by the very same man that designed the Brooklyn Bridge. So in the tech film, we talk about weight reduction. Now, this one in particular is 220 pounds lighter than the car it replaces. That's like almost 10% difference, which is not inconsequential. Now, as important as that is, I was excited to drive this car because if you've been watching the show for a while, you know I'm a huge fan of the Cadillac ATS, and especially Dave Leone's work on that car. So when I found out this was moving to the ATS platform, I expected something completely different. I was expecting the car to drive like an ATS, and I guess I'm kind of surprised it doesn't. It physically is smaller than the Gen 5 car. It physically, in certain instances, like when I've taken it very fast off of like exit ramps or some of the country roads we've been on, it definitely feels more composed, more mature. Like it does have the bits from the ATS, but obviously Al Oppenheiser has still kept in the Camaro-ness of this car. And when I mean Camaro-ness, there's like more heft to this than the ATS, even though the weight is reduced. It's kind of an odd combo they did here. And there's really a couple of ways that they arrived at that. Number one is some of the bits that we talked about in the tech film. They actually lowered weight in individual pieces, not just the overall car. And it's really focused on unsprung weight. That's really some of the big differences here. But also, this now has magnetic ride control. So right now, we're just in regular tour mode, and I wouldn't say it's soft. You get a little bit of roll in the back over there, not a lot, virtually no pitch from side to side. But notice when you go up to the sport mode, it cleans up the roll in the back a little bit. Now, granted, if you really push this thing through a turn, and again, the only turns we've gone on have been exit ramps. If you really push it, you notice a little bit of roll in the rear. But when you get into track mode, which this one has, that's when you get virtually nothing in the rear and no pitch whatsoever. Okay, so there's one more thing about this magnetic ride control. So now in the C450 episode, we talked about decoupling the different mappings, like the engine mapping from the dampers, from the steering. Well, now with this magnetic ride control, you can decouple parts of it, like between track and tour and sport. Like, for example, the exhaust note from the dampers. I don't know why you'd want to decouple the track note from the, say, dampers of track. Maybe it gives you a little bit more fuel economy. I don't know. One other little tidbit about it, so you can't see it at night because we're out during the day, but the lighting here, all this LED lighting, that is also, you can change it based on the settings of track, sport, and tour. So you can even decouple the lighting from, say, the damper mapping. It's that customizable. So what's the old saying? When in Rome, do as the Romans. Well, when in Buffalo, do as the Buffalonians. I've been here for like a grand total, I think, of like 3 minutes, and I've already learned that this region of the world, these are not buffalo wings, these are chicken wings. And we're at the place where they were invented, the Anchor Bar in Buffalo, New York. And this is like, goes back to way in like 1964. The family that founded this place, the Bellissimo family, their daughter was here on a busy weekend night, had some friends come over, and it was like the dinner rush. It's like, hey, can you wait till later and we'll get you dinner? Well, later was like midnight. She runs into the kitchen, asks her mother to whip something together, then goes out and starts hanging out with her friends. The mother's looking around the kitchen like, I got nothing. So she sees these chicken wings that she was going to use for chicken stock, or like soup back in the day. I mean, that's what you did. She's like, you know what? These ones spoke to her. She's like, these are too good to make soup out of. So she decided to broil them. So now they're all fried. Back in the day, the early versions were broiled, and then she mixed hot sauce and butter and then serve them to her friends. And you know, like back in the day when your parents, they like did something not bad to you, but they did something in front of your friends that embarrassed the crap out of you. Well, that's what this girl thought. But here's the difference. This turned into like a famous bar food around the world. Now fast forward to 2015, and we're straight chilling with Jesse, the bartender here. We roll in, and I'm like, Jesse, I don't like blue cheese. And he's like, look, we homemade. It's homemade here, you gotta try it. I'm like, I don't like blue cheese. He's like, look, if you want ranch, you're gonna have to go and sit in another room with one of the waitresses, because I am not gonna serve you anything but blue cheese. And with that, I'm going to update my Twitter status. Okay, so I know you and I already talked about the design of the gauges, but you know I'm a frustrated car designer at heart, and there is one little detail in here which is just, it's simple, but it's awesome. So look at the vents here. Like, they got these big vents. It's like pageantry, the way these vents work. And we did talk about the interior a bit in the tech review, so check that out as well. But this, so Tom Peters and his crew, they came up with an idea of making the dash very simple. So now you've got this screen, right? And then you've got all the HVAC buttons here. But how do you adjust the fan and the temperature? Well, instead of just giving you these huge vents here, or actually making them smaller and putting another rotary knob, they made the bezels the rotary knob. So here you can adjust the fan, and here you adjust the temperature. Now that is design. So in summary, what do we got? Well, there's no doubt about it, there are a number of design changes here, but way more importantly is the changes that are underneath the car. And yes, we have focused a lot on weight reduction, which is great, but the weight reduction works in conjunction with the switch to Dave's ATS platform. Now, I'm gonna be very honest with you guys. I came into this expecting a way different experience. I expected this thing to drive like an ATS, which is a little bit lighter on its feet if I'm really being honest. But this, by switching to the ATS platform, what they've done is they've taken the maturity from that platform, blessed it on the Camaro, but very much kept the driving dynamics of a Camaro. So now you have the balance of a modern day muscle car with more of the performance of a sports sedan that Dave has given us in the ATS. So with that, I want to leave you guys with a question. Now, in the past year, we've had a very interesting ride. We've seen something totally new from Mustang, and now we've seen something totally new from Camaro. And simply from a design perspective, and you could say for the same thing for driving dynamics on both, but from a design perspective, they both went with changing the car completely, but unmistakably keeping it the same. So from 500 feet away, 50 feet away, whatever it is, this very much looks like a Camaro, and the Mustang is very much a Mustang. So my question to you is this. I don't care if you're a Camaro guy, a Mustang guy, or if you don't like muscle cars at all. Which design do you prefer? Let me know which one you prefer, why you prefer it, and let me know what region of the world you live in. Let me know in the comments below or via our social media, MotoManTV all in word, MotoManTV all in word, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And I want to leave you with one more thing. So you've been watching us, on YouTube now for a while, and probably some other places. Well, I would want to make sure you guys know that you can now get us on Android as well as iOS.